Hey everybody, it is Sunday evening and we are finally going to take a trip around the world. Been busy in the fish room this afternoon. I got a bunch of tanks cleaned up and did a bunch of water changes. So now we're ready to go around and have a look at all the tanks. Not a lot going on here in my 29 miscellaneous. I did do a water change on this tank today. I cleaned the biofilters in this tank because I always have to clean the biofilters in this tank for some reason. I don't know why they get grungy as fast as they do, but they really do get grunged up, and it restricts the water flow quite quickly in this tank for some reason. I did have a few people point out that I got the impression that they thought that it was getting clogged like a filter. They even commented on one or two occasions, people commented about what was getting caught in it and how it was getting through my actual filter to then get caught in my biosponge. And that's not what's happening. It's, for whatever reason, the bacterial growth in those biosponges just grows crazy, and it's actually growing in the sponge. So it's nothing getting caught in the sponge, it's just the growth of the bacterial colonies within that biofilter. And from time to time, in any filter, they get, that growth gets so much in there that you have to clean them out to allow the water to flow through it properly again. It's just, for some reason in this tank, that seems to happen in a matter of days. I've just done a water change today, and I just got the bio sponges all scrubbed out and nice and clean. And you can see for once we don't have water flowing through that center channel. But today is Sunday, and we'll see how long it takes before I've got water flowing through that center channel. It's a brand new filter, brand new bio sponges just cleaned, and a nice shiny clean fish tank with about a 50%, maybe 40% water change today. So the only thing I can think of in here that is of concern is my Anubias, which is getting a little bit big for this tank. So probably not too far in the future, we're going to have to get in there and snip a little bit of that back. You can even see I've got new growth coming in right now that's going to get in there and fill in even more. So that'll have to be getting trimmed out of there pretty soon. Don't forget, I do sell my aquatic plants. I'll put my email down below if you want to contact me. We will see some more in the very near future here. When we get to a couple tanks ahead of where we are now, we're going to see quite a lot of Anubias that's been removed from one of my tanks. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is still my 29 miscellaneous. Now we're going to move on to my 55-gallon Gourami tank. Just did a big water change in here today. I did a chemi-clean treatment on this tank recently, and when I got the tank finished up, I did a water change but not a filter change, and I waited about a week and got back in there, and we did another big water change today. And again, I did not get in there and clean the filter. I did the filter not too long ago in this tank, so I'm not worried about it. It's been only a couple of weeks, I think, since I've done the filter in this tank. So the only thing that I really want to say about this tank is when I got in and cleaned the glass down, I missed that spot right there. I don't know how I've done that, and it's just driving me nuts that I've got that one spot right there in front of me. There's a couple more spots here and there when you look around that I've missed, but they're not so obvious. That one just stands out like a strawberry in a stew, as they say. So I'll have to get in there and just give that a quick wipe, and we'll be done. Otherwise, not a whole lot going on in here that I can think of. I did see my coolie loaches in there again. They came out while I was doing a water change and were all over the tank, swimming around like crazy. They were all the way down at the far end. I did actually speak about that in a video I was shooting. I shot a video about how it's not always bad to make impulse purchases. My thick-lipped Gourami in here was an impulse purchase, and it's one of the best fish I have. I really, really like this fish a lot. So impulse purchases are not always bad. I'll attach a card to that video if you're interested in it. And we did get to see my coolie loaches out in that video, and I did have a little chat about my thoughts about why they were coming out so vigorously during the water change, but I'm not going to get back into that now. We got a lot to cover today. So the only thing I really did in the water change here today, other than wipe down the glass, was, you can see I snipped a few leaves off the Anubias that were pretty rough. They weren't really serving any purpose at any, at this point. They were just kind of looking ugly in there, so I trimmed them back, and that's it. I will need to trim my temple plant back pretty soon. That's getting kind of tall. We're already kind of just about up to the surface, so I'll have to cut that back a little bit. And, I want to keep this one bushy. I don't ever really want to let it get exposed to that atmospheric air above the water line, because it really changes the way they start growing, and I don't want to mess up what I got going on in there, because I really like the way that looks. I think that looks fantastic, so I want to keep that going just like that. So my former Tbar tank, still don't really know what to call this tank. Maybe I might start calling it my angelfish tank again. That's what this tank started at. I used to have 8 angelfish in this tank all at once. I do have another tank in the basement here that I call my angelfish tank, though, so I'm not really sure what to call this tank. Anyway, you might have noticed that there's some big gaps in this tank where big, huge piles of Anubias used to be. I removed so much Anubias out of there today. You can see the size of that rhizome right there that I cut off. That's about the diameter of my pinky finger. And I got in, and there's a couple of big chunks down here that came up and out, and I cut off. I cut some off of this end. I don't know if you can actually see the rhizome down here where I cut it. You can see a nice big fat chunk of rhizome right here. There was actually 2 sprouts coming off this way. And you can see down here, this piece got cut off. So I really did a number on the Anubias in here. Again, I got big chunks of Anubias for sale right now. I won't be able to sell them under my normal flat rate, because they won't fit in my normal flat rate boxes. So just contact me. Check my email down below if you're interested in large pieces of Anubias that I've got available right now. Again, I can send you pictures or whatever. Just hit me up on the email and we can talk about that. So that's all I did while I was in here. Well, I did wipe the glass down, but I didn't do a gravel vac. You can probably see all the pleco poop all over the bottom. All I did was wipe the glass down and just give a big whackety chop on that Anubias and got that all cleared out of the way so we can actually see the fish and we can see the rocks. Speaking of fish, you can see my Synodontis petricola. I'm sorry, I bought it as a Synodontis petricola, but over the years I've come to believe it is a Synodontis lucipinnis. If for no other reason, it has not grown since the day I got it. That thing is about 5 years old now, maybe 6 years old. Maybe older than that now that I'm thinking about it. We'll call it 6. And it is still about the same size it was when I bought it. So that lets me know it is not the petricola. If it was a petricola, it would be about 5 or 6 inches long by now. So that is, again, it's I don't see any reason to believe it's not the Synodontis lucipinnis. So anyway, we get to see that one a little bit now that it's, doesn't have just gobs and gobs of places to hide. It could practically live inside that Anubias before. So now we're getting to see it out and about swimming around a little bit because it's a really cool catfish. At one point, I had 8 of them in the tank at the same time, and I made a very, very bad decision early on regarding RO water, and I killed 7 of the 8 of them. How that one survived, I have no idea. Honestly, how any fish in the tank survived, I don't really have any idea. But some of the fish survived, and that one single Synodontis in there was one of the survivors out of the 8 that I had. That was a very, very expensive mistake. That was not a cheap fish. So anyway, that's all I really got going on in here. My big pleco is still able to hide, as hard as it is to believe. If you look past the angelfish, you can see this stuff back here, sort of. That is actually my big pleco hiding up in the Anubias. So I didn't remove all of their places to hide. I just made it a little more open in the open areas. The places that they have to hide are still thick and dense and provide plenty of shade and cover. It's just not, 3/4 of the tank at this point. It's only a couple of nice little areas that they can get in and hide. So I think it looks a lot better like this. And again, don't forget, I got big chunks of Anubias for sale if anybody's interested. So we might do something different to this tank now that it's opened up a little bit. And by different, I mean maybe add some more fish or something. We'll see. Who knows? But moving on. Coming down here to my 40 breeder. The only thing I've really got going on in this tank is my Molly, my Panda Molly, is just getting really old and dying, and her swim bladder doesn't work anymore. She usually lies on the bottom or lies on some leaves, and then when I come in to feed the tank, she swims up and gets her food and everything, but then just goes back to lying down on the bottom. She's not really able to stay buoyant in the water anymore. So I don't even see her. She might be gone. I did a water change on this tank earlier. I wiped the glass down, but that's it. I didn't trim any plants. I didn't vac the gravel. I didn't do a filter change or anything. And she was still alive then, but I don't see her now, and I haven't seen her since then. I've been in here a couple times actually looking for her specifically, and I've not seen her. So she may very well be gone. I don't know. On a side note, not really related to the fish tank. I did have to bury my cat Luke yesterday. He's finally passed away. He's been getting really, just kind of fading away. He was 15, and his time was coming, and we were just sort of waiting, and finally on, there she is. Finally on Thanksgiving evening, he, took his terminal breath, and that was about the end of him, and so I got to spend yesterday, burying him and taking care of all that. So that was fun. And then today's my birthday, so it's been a fun last couple of days. As far as this tank goes, I really probably ought to be getting in there and doing some kind of gardening in there. I probably ought to get in there with a weed whacker by the look of it. It is so thick and overgrown, but I don't really know what I would do or how I would clear it out. If you look at all this stuff back here, wherever my finger is, there it is. That is a piece of Anubias I tucked in there years and years ago, and it's died off and come back, and I've cleaned, and it's just somehow the roots have made their way through the log, and you can just see little bits and pieces of it growing up and out of everywhere. This is some sort of tiny Anubias. That is about 6 years old too, and so is this clump back here. So the tank is actually starting to get a little bit cleaned up, and you can see why right there. I have deliberately stopped putting algae wafers in this tank. I just feed my tanks the same way all the time out of habit, and I always just throw a few algae wafers broken up into pieces. I scatter it around the tank to make sure the bottom fish get food. And in this tank, they just stopped feeding on all of the natural forage in there, and I wound up having the tank is just so overgrown again with all this scum and grossness, and so I've stopped feeding with the algae wafers, I don't know, maybe a week ago, and it is already noticeably brighter and greener. You can clearly see how it's, been scraped clean in certain spots. None of that stuff is dying off. It's just been removed from the surface of some of those leaves. Likewise here. So I've got some rubber lip plecos in this tank, and I've got the 4 Siamese algae eaters in here, and then of course I had a lot of guppies in here. I've still got at least 1 or 2, and then of course that Molly, who probably isn't doing a whole lot in the way of keeping the tank clean anymore, but she is still in here. So I used to have a little bit more in the way of algae eating fish in this tank, so maybe we'll have to move back in that direction, or maybe even put some mystery snails or nearite snails in here. But I also need to get in here and really thin out some of this plant. So who knows? I think this stuff is crypt. I'm not sure. I always get my plants confused. I bought it so many years ago, I don't even remember what it was called when I bought it. But I think that's crypt. So if I get in there and pull some of that out or remove some of that, who knows? Maybe I'll even have some of that available at some point in the future. So there you go. That's all that's going on in my 40 breeder. My native tank now has a new old piece of wood lying on the top. You can see this piece right here. That was the piece that when it was scaped out before I redid it was down on this end, and it was lying across there, and it's sort of supposed to look like a tree that's kind of fallen from the shoreline and fallen into the lake. And of course now it's not in the lake anymore, it's just lying across the top of it, but that's just for visual appeal. It sort of breaks up the line of the tank. It's not this hard flat black line in the back anymore. It looks like a piece of wood, and that just sort of makes it a little easier on the eyes. And of course all of the shape and texture and structure up above the fish tank, anything that sort of blurs the line between the fish tank and the rest of the room is always a good thing. So I did finally get in here and do a big water change. I got the glass wiped down. I got the activated carbon that I had in the filter. I removed that because it had done its job. It got all that green dye out of the tank. And so what we're looking at now is not green water. It does have some tannin buildup in it again. Oh, look, I just noticed we've lost another one of my little shiners. I think we're down to 1 left from that batch I just bought recently from the bait and tackle shop. So I mean, that's what you get when you buy your fish from a bait and tackle shop. As I said before, the original batch I bought 18 a few years ago, and we're down to just 2 left from that original batch. And I think we went through a dozen of them in the first month or so of them dying off. So I'll be down that way again soon enough. I'll pick up another dozen jumbo shiners or large shiners or whatever they've got the next time I'm down there, and we'll bring them back and put them in here and see if we can't get them to survive. But where all this green is coming from, it's a combination of my Chinese algae eater dying, which did a fantastic job of keeping this tank clean. And then, of course, I recently jacked up the lighting on this tank to overdrive and a half with all of these floodlights shining straight down into the tank. And it is good, high quality, for all intents and purposes. We can say full spectrum. It's missing a few little wavelengths here and there through the cyan spectrum, but mostly it's full spectrum lighting. And of course that gives plenty of yellow and green light, and cyanobacteria, algae, anything that's a little more primitive utilizes the yellow and green light a lot more efficiently than other plants do. I know a lot of people say plants don't use green light. That's not true. They do. They just don't use it as much as they use other spectrums like the blue and the red. But plants do use green light, and the more primitive the plant is, the more green and yellow spectrums that they actually make use of. So if you're using, something that's got a lot of green and yellow in it, you can really jack up your algae and your cyanobacteria growth by doing that. So a combination of a bunch of different stuff going on right now is why this tank looks so green. But it's not the water. It's just growing on everything in there. If I scoop up some of that water and put it in a clear glass and look at it, you might see a hint of yellow in it. I just did a pretty big water change a couple days ago, so it's not very, it hasn't had a chance to really get tannin stained again, so I don't even think you'd see a whole lot of yellow in there. That green is actually coming from what's in the tank. And lastly, I will say that I did order a new filter. That is such a reduced amount of water flow right there because I think it's just the impeller and all of the internal workings of the filter are clogged up. And I could take it apart and get it all cleaned out and everything, but the insides of the filter are all decayed away from years of use of the UV light when I used to use that all the time. And it's a torn up filter. It's time for a new one. So that'll be here tomorrow, and we'll be putting a new filter on the tank. So if you're interested in that, maybe I'll shoot some video about setting up a canister filter and putting it on the tank and that sort of thing. So there you go. That's my 125 gallon native tank. My Gudgeon tank is the only tank I did not get to today that I really wanted to be able to say I've done work on all of my tanks this week, and I have not. I need to get in here and do a filter change. This one has a hang on the back filter, so it's really easy, and I should do it on a regular basis, but I don't. I treat this tank like it's one of my neglected tanks. And when I say neglected, I guess I should say more of my, I don't know, I just do much more infrequent water changes on them. But this tank only has, that I know of, 2 fish in it anymore. I might still have my, hang on a minute, let me turn this fan off. If I can figure out which way to turn the knob. There we go. I keep a fan blowing down here just to keep the air circulating. Otherwise, it gets really muggy and humid, and I don't want mold and stuff like that growing down here. So I always keep a fan blowing, circulating the air around. Once again, if we look in here, we can see how clean those rocks are. So that's a pretty good indication that somebody in there is scraping those rocks. And the only fish I had that would have been scraping the rocks in here was a rubber-lip pleco. So that might still be alive, but it has been a long time since I've seen it. I do still have the little South American bumblebee. At least he was in there a few days ago. I saw him moving, swimming around in there. And then, of course, there's my purple spotted gudgeon right there, being as action-packed and exciting as always. So this tank definitely needs some maintenance. I really need to get in there and do that filter change like I was saying, put new pads in it, and probably even clean out the bio sponge a little bit. But I also need to get in there, get the glass wiped down. I need to gravel vac a little bit, although that's a challenge in this tank because it is sand. So I've got to do that very, very carefully and gently, not to, just pull sand right out of the tank. It's a lot more challenging when it's not gravel, when you're trying to gravel vac sand. I guess that's why they call it gravel vacuuming and not sand vacuuming. But I've also probably got to get in there maybe and trim some plants up a little bit. This is something that one of my viewers sent me, and I planted it in there a long time ago, and it looks great. I love it. I'm not sure what it is. I want to say Ludwigia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I really, really like it. It's a pretty plant. I like the way it's got the sort of purplish pink on the bottom underside of the leaf, but the nice bright vibrant green on the top. And now that it's kind of taken off, it really is growing really well. So I'm happy with that. And that's, about all I can think of with this tank. This tank really is one of my, it's a pretty tank, but I think of it more as an aquatic garden than a fish tank. The fish just happen to kind of live in there because they don't really do much and we don't get a whole lot of action out of them. So moving on to my 125-gallon tank. We'll take a step back in a minute and look at the whole thing, but we'll start down at this end because I did get in here the other day, did a big water change, got the glass all wiped down and cleaned up, and I removed a whole lot of tiger lily that was growing up to the surface and had sent out runners and was spreading out all over the place. And I also removed a couple of fronds from my Anubias back there. These big, this is Java fern. I've got a bunch of Java fern here, but these are Anubias. I'm not sure the species of Anubias, but it is Anubias. And I cut a few of those branches out of the way, or those leaves out of the way. And so now that floodlight shines straight in and straight down to the bottom, and you can actually see, the rocks and the woodwork and a little bit of color and everything on the bottom. So that's opened up nicely. I'm really enjoying the way that looks. I didn't really do a whole lot in the way of removing plants anywhere else. I will say that my Windelov, my Java Windelov right here, I had a bunch of growth of the cyanobacteria and algae and stuff on the top. And the last water change I did, I sprayed it with hydrogen peroxide. And that did a lot of damage, and it did some damage to the Windelov itself. But when I went in there yesterday to do a water change, what I wound up doing was pulling out a bunch of chunks of new growth and new babies, I guess you call them. But not the little tiny ones that come off of the tips that I normally get that look like little tiny baby ones. These were, golf ball sized chunks of plants. And if you're a regular viewer, you'll remember how dense and thick that was, but look at it now. You can actually see light shining through it. So I really pulled a lot of the middle of that out of there, and again, I have it available for sale if you're interested. So I'm really happy with the way that turned out. That looks a lot better. Did not get in here and do anything with that crypt, but you can see it is starting to sort of spread through the gravel a little bit, and we are starting to get, if you can see past all that reflection and glare, I'm starting to get a little bit of spreading out and some growth on that. I actually did remove a few sort of dead stalks out of this. You can see like this one here. I probably should have got in and pulled that one out too, but whatever, I didn't, and I'm not too worried about it. So overall, that was about it. I didn't really do anything else. Oh, I guess I also did a whole bunch of removal of my floating water sprite down here. That stuff grows into like a matted sheet. If you're familiar with how the Okefenokee swamp works and how floating mats of vegetation slowly begin to develop trees growing on them, and you get these big floating mats of wobbling little islands. That's kind of what starts to happen in here almost. If I feel like if I left that long enough, a small person could probably walk across the top of that. It gets so thick. But it is not thick anymore because I pulled a whole bunch of that out of there. And in fact, I've got so much water sprite right now that I actually just threw that away because I don't even have room in my grow out tanks to stuff any more water sprite. So again, if you're interested in plants, I put a bunch of them in the bag when I sell them. So check my email down below. I've got a lot of water sprite available in addition to the Java fern and giant chunks of Anubias at the moment. So that's about it. Filter change, wiped down the glass, big water change, cleaned up some of the plants in here, and otherwise everything is looking good. Nobody's sick, nobody's died, and everything is looking good. My 20-gallon angelfish tank just got a nice big water change today. Got the glass wiped down. I did a filter change, and I also cleaned out the biosponge in the filter. My clown pleco in this tank is still alive and well. I just saw that a little while ago, actually. And, of course, you can see, if you look at the wood a little further up, you can see how it's got some green growth on it. Got a little bit of that hair algae growing in there. But if you look lower down on the wood, you can see it's all scraped and scoured nice and clean. That's from that pleco. And then my whiptail catfish is probably hanging on the back of the filter intake, because that's where it always hangs. So you can see its tail sticking down there on the bottom. You can kind of make it out a little bit. It's sort of hanging on the back facing away from us, so even from this angle we can't see it. But that looks like a string hanging off the bottom of that filter intake is actually the tail of my whiptail catfish. So he's still alive and well. And that, of course, is my angelfish that the tank is named after. So I removed a bunch of the water sprite out of this tank recently to open it up, and I really like it a lot better. It was kind of cool with the water sprite sticking up and out of the top. I do like that emergent growth look. But at the same time, I like to be able to see in the tank, and the root mass from that thing was just out of control. The poor angelfish in there barely had any room to swim around. The schooling fish barely had any room to swim around. And so now that I've got that moved out of there, the tank just looks a lot better. I love watching those blood fins swim in and out of all that Java fern. It just looks awesome. So I really like this tank a lot. I like it a lot more now that I've removed all that. It was just overburdensome. It blocked out all the light. It just, this whole tank was all about that giant piece of water sprite sticking out of the top. And now it actually, you can see the fish swimming around in there and enjoy the sparkles and flashes of color and activity and all that kind of stuff. So definitely an improvement on this tank. Moving on to my quarantine tank. I've had a go around on this tank. I'm not going to do too much detail because I don't know how far back it's been since I've talked about this one. It's been treated for ick. I've still been treating for ick for the last, a little while, week or two. I'm going to give it another several days. Haven't seen any signs whatsoever from these guppies that they were exposed to it. The only fish that really did get exposed to it were the otocinclus catfish that I put in here. And that was the second batch. The first batch I put in was covered in it when I put them in there, and they all died. I thought I'd be able to save them, but I was not. So I put more in, but didn't treat the tank fully. And, again, my mistake. Not anything wrong with the medication or anything, but my mistake of not treating it properly. And the new batch of fish I put in there got ick all over them, and I wound up losing a few of those. But you can see there's still at least one otocinclus left. And the guppies that I put in there are still fine. I've got 3 more of the platinum guppies, and PetSmart is now selling their blue swordtail guppies. And if you get a good look at them under the light, they're a really, really beautiful iridescent blue with, obviously, their swordtail on there. And they stay about Endler size, maybe a little bit bigger than an Endler's. I don't think they get too big. So I'm really looking forward to them. They're going to be some really pretty looking guppies there. So moving on to my final tank here of this video anyway. We're not going to talk about the waterfall tank in this video. I just turned the forward light on in this tank. If I really want to light it up so that we can see it for video, I've got this light that's supposedly for a planted tank, and therefore it has additional I'm thinking about what I was saying earlier. It has additional red and blue LEDs in it, and so when you turn it on, it gives a really sort of odd, unnatural look, but it really does light the tank up really bright, and you get to see Butterbean in all his glory. I did have somebody, a new viewer the other day, or maybe a first-time viewer that had just seen Butterbean, was asking what those marks looked like he'd been cut up or whatever. I don't know. If you're watching this video, or anybody else is seeing this video for the first time, and you're wondering about those marks on Butterbean, I really don't know what they are. I think it was due to him being kept in salt water or brackish water. I say salt, I meant salty water. I kept him in brackish water steadily for many years. It was maybe 5 years that he stayed in the same salinity. I never changed it. It was 1.008 for, again, maybe 5 years I kept him in that kind of salinity, and he was developing those marks on him. And so several people suggested, maybe change the salinity, make it a little fresher. And so I've done that, and the salinity now, I keep it just below the threshold of brackish, even though I still call this my brackish tank. That's more of a title rather than a definition. But it's about 1.003 or maybe 0.004 at this point. So depending on some people's standards, it might still be considered brackish. I've seen as low as 1.003 considered brackish. I think of 1.005 as being the beginning of the brackish end of the spectrum. But that's neither here nor there. We're just below that, and he definitely looks better, but still not right. So I might lower the salinity even more, but the other side of the coin is I've got bumblebee gobies in here who really do need to be in brackish water, so I've already got them on sort of the low end of where they should be, although I don't see any at the moment. I didn't do a water change on this tank recently. I did wipe the glass down and I did top the tank off, but I need to get in there and remove the snail shell graveyard and, of course, do an actual water change. Topping a tank off is no substitute for an actual water change, but this tank is another one of those that gets water changes very infrequently, so topping it off was not a problem for me. I'll go ahead and do a water change here in the next couple of weeks probably. I'm not in any hurry to do it, but we'll get there at some point, and of course we'll get that on video when we do. Other than that, not a lot else going on that I can think of in this tank. The plants definitely respond better when I reduce the salinity, so we'll see how that goes maybe as time goes on, and maybe if I don't have any of those bumblebee gobies anymore. I know I saw 3 of them swimming around at one point yesterday, all at the same time together, and I don't know why we're just not seeing any of them during this video, but maybe there's been some swimming around at some point in the video that I just haven't seen, but I don't see any anywhere. So at any rate, we'll see what happens. Nothing's written in stone permanently. Everything changes, so we'll see what goes on as time rolls on. So there you go, everybody. There was our trip all the way around the world. We're back where we started. I pulled it off in just over half an hour. I thought it was going to run a lot longer than that, so I did good. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you stayed with me for all that, make sure you subscribe. That way you won't miss anything I've got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. And then don't forget, of course, this one here is my 29 miscellaneous. So thanks again. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you real soon on the next one.